Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on next generation coaching, executive coaching with an edge. I'm Michael Carson, Group Commercial Director for Libra Europe Consulting, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. So if we move on to the agenda slide, Alex, before I introduce our fabulous speakers this afternoon, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. The session is scheduled for an hour. We have around 40 minutes of material to present, and then we'll open up to Q&A. As you can see from the running order on screen, we've got some really interesting content to cover, so hopefully that'll prompt plenty of thoughts and questions. And on that note, there is a chat function you'll see on bottom of the Zoom bar. I'm sure everyone's familiar with that these days. If you drop the questions in there as we go through, we'll answer as many as we can at the end. If you could drop or direct them to the host, which is Alex, I think it's under Libra Europe Consulting. If you drop them directly to Alex, Alex will collate the questions and we'll pull them up at the end. We'll try to keep the session to an hour, so if there's any questions that we don't get around to, we'll follow up directly with those that have asked the questions after the session. And finally, everyone should be, and I think they are, on mute. If not, if you could pop yourself on mute, and yeah, if you could keep on mute just to avoid any background interference, that would be great. So, admin out of the way, let me introduce you to our speakers this afternoon. So first up, we're delighted to welcome Nick Hay as our guest speaker for this session. Nick achieved his first MD position as at Samworth Brothers Distribution at the age of just 31, became CEO of Fowler Welch in his mid-30s, and had established his first joint venture by the age of 40. Having benefited hugely from good coaching in his formative years in business, Nick is well placed to discuss both the impact on him as a young executive of good coaching and also the value he places on it today as a coach and mentor himself. Next, we have Lance Kieran. Lance is L3E's Director of Programs for Leadership and Management and can call on a wealth of experience, having worked both with and for a number of FTSE 100 companies across different industry sectors. Lance has extensive experience in boardroom facilitation, coaching and mentoring, and is also a qualified and registered practicing psychotherapist. His blend of practical business experience and psychology heavily influenced the design of LEC's leadership and management programs, making for unique and powerful interventions. And last but by no means least, we have Dr. Fiona Beddoes-Jones. Fiona is a learning and people development specialist who began her career as a transformational change consultant, retraining in her 30s to become a workplace psychologist. Working with senior officers in the UK military, Fiona completed her PhD in authentic leadership and its development in 2013, from which both the 3 pillars model of authentic leadership and authentic leadership 360 emerged. Passionate about helping people authentically become the best version of themselves, she is the creator of a number of psychometric tools, including thinking styles, cognitive team roles, and leadership temperament types. So, without further ado, I'll hand over to Nick, who will kick us off.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be here and to share some of my experiences. I'm going to talk through a few short slides, and within those, I'm going to address 5 areas where I've learned from people through my career to date, and hopefully share some of those. And then towards the end, we'll wrap up with 3 final points, which hopefully we'll pull things together in terms of my slides. So before I do that, just want to move on to the next slide, which illustrates the relationship as I see it between a coach and a mentor. So if people think about Jessica Ennis, I'm sure that's a face that most of you will know. She was the face of the 2012 Olympics. And was indeed Olympic champion in 2012. That's a visible measure of success, winning an Olympic gold medal. What you don't see is in the background behind someone's successful sporting career is the person who's on the right there, which is a chap called Tony Minicelli. And Tony is, or was, Jessie's coach. But again, similarly, what you don't see is it's not just about that one coach. There'll be a whole set of people that sat behind Jessie's success. And similarly for myself, relationship I've had with coaches and mentors, and indeed in mentoring and coaching people, has some real parallels with athletics and all sports. So I'll talk through that, but before I do, just a little bit more about myself. So who am I? I'm a dad, husband and stepdad. I'm a failed athlete, hence the athletics reference there. I did okay, but by no means did I ever compete for my country. So as far as I was concerned, very much a failed athlete. I'm a Sheffield United fan as well. And as Michael's already said, and I think I'm not always entirely comfortable about talking about my successes, but I do recognise I've had a good career, and that career to date has been largely as a result of not just the efforts of myself and the people I've worked with, but the huge contribution and support I've received from a number of coaches and mentors. So in terms of a collection of mentors, if you like, I started my career in 1995 as a graduate trainee. And through my career, I've had a number of people who've coached me and helped me develop in terms of my experience as a manager in business. My career has almost entirely been in food, in the food supply chain, working for a number of food manufacturers and for logistics businesses as well. And through the last 21 years, no, 26 years, I wish it was 21, 26 years, I've worked with a number of people who've helped me grow as an individual. And those names are on that little slide there. And just to pull out a few comments from this, really. The first is, I'm still in touch with all of those people. Those people have continued to provide me with support, guidance, coaching, mentoring throughout my career. So when I talk about collecting mentors or coaches, it's because I actually have. As I've gone through my career, I've stayed in touch with those people, and they've become a collection of people who remain involved in my life today. The first name on there that might stand out is George W. It's not George W. Bush, it's another George W. He was the first professional mentor that I worked with. He was a professional business coach, and we spent much time together. And I'll come on to some of the things that I did with George in a few slides' time. The other name I'd pull out on there is Emma Hay. There's a reason she's got the same surname as me. She's my wife. Emma was a director of Vodafone, and again, having her in my collection of mentors and coaches, having somebody close to me to help me has been a huge influence as well. So I think the key point here is that, like an athlete and the support staff that they may have, those different individuals on there have helped me with different skills and with different issues throughout my career. So the 5 areas of learning that I would summarize that I've picked up from people are illustrated on here. So I'm going to give you some examples for each of them. So starting off with soft skills. So that whole area, I spent a huge amount of time with George working on. As someone who was relatively young as a managing director, and indeed before that I was an operations director, quite often I would not be seen as the senior person in a room because people would make assumptions about my age. And what George taught me to do, and the reason I've got a picture of a diary or Filofax there, was how to give signals to a room about where you fitted in the hierarchy of a meeting, or how you were perceived by small little behaviours that you could use. A couple of examples would be not opening your diary, because the minute you open your diary, you're seen as the person that's there to take the notes. So George and I spent a lot of time on soft skills around sending signals about who I was and what I was there to do in meetings. Moving on to perspective. Again, something that somebody's taught me is the importance of assumed tone. I think all too often in business, and this has increasingly been the case as social media and messaging have been used as opposed to face-to-face verbal contact, is it's very, very easy to assume a tone when you're on the receiving end of something. And a little trick that somebody gave me is when you receive a message or an email, read it out in the most aggressive, nasty possible way you can read it out. Then read it out a second time in the loveliest, most open, supportive and caring way you possibly can. And then stop and ask yourself, which of those two tones actually am I supposed to be hearing? I think too often people jump to tone, and that's a skill that I've learned as well. From a hard skills point of view, again, the work I did with George, we actually spent a significant amount of time studying Machiavelli. We studied the Prince in particular, and that was about me learning how to play politics within an organization, not necessarily to be political, but to recognize when my behavior may drive behavior in others, and to know when to use certain types of behavior. And the best example of that would be, again, in my early career, I was very, very willing to have an argument with people. But actually, if you've got no chance of winning the argument, why start the argument in the first place? And that was one of the big things I learned with George, studying Machiavelli. Support. I think it's really important that you've got an ability to vent to someone who's independent from where you're working, to express your frustrations, to literally just let everything out. And that's a picture of my wife there, who's very much played that role for me in the last few years. And that support is very important for all of us. And then the last one of the 5 areas where I've used coaches and mentors is to be a conscience, to hold me to account, to challenge me. Quite often we become quite ingrained in our own thinking. We have a very strong opinion on something. And at times it's really useful to have someone to challenge you and really question the decisions you're making and the direction you're trying to take a business in. So those are the 5 areas that I've had to accept that I've needed development. But it's also, I guess, a little bit broader than that as well. So not only do you need great coaches and mentors, and they're represented there by Master Shifu from Kung Fu Panda, which is a personal favourite film of mine. You also need the teams that you work with, and that's both the people who sponsor you to be coached and to invest time and effort in your development, but also your colleagues who help you build the success that you manage to achieve in any role that you're in. And then finally, your family, who absolutely have been a motivator and supported me in the success that I've had. So the final slide, and just to wrap up before Lance picks up, is the last 3 points I'd make are that the reason I've been able to be successful and take on so much advice and support and coaching and mentoring is because I've been receptive to it. Again, that probably comes from my failed athletic career, where you're always seeking to improve your performance. And you only do that by actually learning to take criticism, learning to accept that you have weaknesses, learning to accept that you have areas of development. If you're not receptive, and again, I've worked with people who I've failed to coach, who I would have liked to have coached more, it's nearly always been because they've not been receptive to criticism and not been receptive to constructive advice as to how they can improve their performance. The second point on here is it's got to be relevant. The coaching, the skills that you learn have got to be relevant in the role and the environment that you're in. There's no point focusing on skills that do not enhance your current role. And then finally, they have to be realistic. If the objectives, the learnings you're trying to achieve are not realistic, then everybody's going to fail. The example I'd use for myself is I can't stand the sight of blood. There's no way on earth I could be trained to be a medic or even just a first aider. So it would be unrealistic to try and develop me in that way. So those are the 3 key R's for me. You've got to be receptive. The development you have has to be relevant to the role and your career, but it also needs to be realistic in terms of your ability to learn the skills that you're being coached or mentored in. And then my very final comment, going back to Master Shifu from Kung Fu Panda, and again, just to reiterate the point about being receptive. And that quote is, there is always something more to learn, even for a master. You've got to be open to learning.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Nick. I think that's a real interesting sort of background and context to lead Lance into the next section of our webinar. So over to you, Lance.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you, Nick, for sharing your story, your career journey, and the role that coaching, mentoring has played. I think your 3 R's, receptive, relevant, and realistic, positions very nicely what I'm about to share. But before I talk about NextGen coaching, I think it would be worth just giving you a bit of background to L3E and Libra Europe Consulting, as LEC has very much influenced our approach to how we see an effective coaching model work. L3E is the training and development business arm of the Libra Europe Group, LEC, with LCP, the Libra Consulting Partners, being the business consulting arm. What unites us all across LEC is our commitment to business performance improvement and the recognition that people are a critical dimension of any solution. Founded over 20 years ago, the emphasis of Libra's work has always been to deliver tangible, sustainable, and meaningful performance improvement. And as we all know, the transfer of knowledge and continued organizational learning are key if high performance is to be sustained. So shaping the right solutions comes from having a good understanding of the business context and an honest understanding of where we are. For it is what it is. We make no judgment about what we see, merely help businesses get on the right page with regards to the reality of what is happening. The more honest we can be about the real reasons for performance opportunities, the better chance we have of making the right decisions. And so it is with coaching, helping the coachee be clear about where they are on their journey, their priorities, and where the emphasis of the coaching should lie to deliver the greatest value. This we see as the first step in forging a meaningful coaching relationship. Know thyself has been with us for millennia. At L3E, all of our leadership management programs start with the self. For the greater we know ourselves, the better we find ourselves able to understand the ways of others, particularly those around us. For me, being aware of myself and the behaviors, interests, perspectives, experience of the people I meet is what makes every day fascinating and different. The way I see it, through my open eyes, I can see much. If I embrace the realizations that come through other people's eyes, there's an opportunity to accelerate my acquisition of wisdom. So at L3E, we talk a lot about personal effectiveness, interpersonal excellence, and business mastery, business tools, in that order. We believe without effective personal and interpersonal skills, the business tools struggle to get implemented well. Lastly, whilst I have talked about the principles that inform all of our work, whether in the consultancy or training business, we are here today to talk specifically about coaching. In this space, we might not overtly teach as we would in one of our comprehensive training programs. We do, however, introduce knowledge, insights, particularly in the form of pre-reading preparation before a coaching session to situate the focus of a coaching conversation. So, NextGen coaching, typically designed to be a 6-month intervention, but very much tailored to the need of the coachee. You may however, want to go faster than 6 months because it fits with supporting a business objective, or slower because it suits you better to do that. We will make the program work for you. If you look at the slide diagram, you can see essentially 3 phases: pre-work to the program, and post-work. This might be a good point to describe why we describe it as coaching with an edge. We establish tangible measures for success with the coachee at the outset. It's because of the emphasis that is put on not just the quality coaching interventions, but the pre-assessment work in the form of diagnostics and scoping conversations that we can do this. As I said earlier, in all of our engagements, we put a lot of effort into understanding where and how best to add value. The pre-work helps the coachee establish the right goals, objectives, and KPIs that enable the coachee to see the value in the work that they embark on. Fiona will talk more about diagnostics. Being the creator of these psychometrics assessments, Fiona is far better placed to explain their roots and focus. As I said, each program typically involves 6 coaching sessions, with the first session, you guessed it, focusing on developing greater self-awareness. This session is guided by some pre-reading and feedback from the cognitive team roles and leadership temperament types diagnostics. As I said, for each session, there will be some pre-reading preparation, which is again tailored to the individual's coaching focus. Finally, there's the program post-work, which is where we measure the success against the tangible KPIs established up front to help also embed the learning realizations and support the coachee in defining their next steps, hence coaching with an edge. Here we are looking at typical module subject areas. Of the 6 modules that I talked about in the call, there are 4 areas that are considered core. Those modules are self-awareness, leading and managing teams, leading and managing change, ensuring productivity and performance. The other 2 elective modules draw from the subject list to the right of the slide. I think it is worth mentioning that it isn't an exclusive list. Based on the needs of the individual coachee, there may be other things that would be useful. That's all driven by the outputs of the diagnostic phase. As I said earlier, this is coaching, not teaching. However, we have found that having clarity around the context of the coaching session to be embarked upon significantly raises the quality of conversation and insights made. So why do we think this is different to traditional executive coaching? Well, I won't read this out line for line. This table can be found on our website. However, I think it worth reinforcing a few of the key points. We believe 6 months is typically the right time frame to make a difference using an approach with clear outcomes, but a process that is responsive enough to be flexible. We are targeting the D-suite, directors and aspiring D-suite executives. And we have built in some exciting psychometrics, particularly around cognitive processing, which we believe will give insights and perspectives not explored before by the coachee. We also build in performance metrics to evidence the value delivered from the coaching. I hope you can see that Nick's receptive, realistic, relevant, the 3 R's are very much informed in how we will approach coaching. And finally, my link slide to Fiona, who has been my partner in crime developing NextGen. The 3 themes embedded in NextGen: authentic leadership, cognitive fitness, and creating culture. Fiona is now going to explain what we mean by these themes and why we believe these to be important. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. So I just want to talk a little bit more about the 3 themes and why we've included them. And then we can explore authentic leadership in a bit more depth. It's been said that we should command in a crisis, manage in certainty, and lead in uncertainty. And we've experienced both crisis and uncertainty over the past year, making the need for leadership, in particular effective leadership, even more important now and in the future. People are complex. We are all the sum total of our parts, our thinking, skills, knowledge, motivations, experience, mistakes, successes, learnings, values, influences, and bias. I could go on. And so every leader is going to lead in their own ways. We might as well recognise that and accept it and encourage leaders to be more of their best selves more of the time. In fact, one of the significant characteristics of authentic leaders is that they endeavour to be their best selves and support others to be the same. There's a lot written about authentic leadership, and it's often misunderstood, particularly the difference between being authentic as a leader, little a, little l, and being an authentic leader, capital A, capital L. So one final thought on this slide. At Libra, we want to support leaders in being the best that they can be in all areas of their lives, which is more than just better leaders. It's better colleagues, better managers, better friends, better parents, and better partners. The second embedded theme is that of cognitive fitness, which, as you can see, we define as thinking in the right ways at the right time with flexibility, agility, and strength. The quality of thinking you do at the front end determines the results you get at the back end. Better thinking at the beginning gets you better results at the end. It's not rocket science, and yet very few organisations actively develop the thinking skills and cognitive capability of their people. Very few leaders actually focus on deliberately improving the quality of their thinking, which is very short-sighted really when you consider that we expect our leaders to be better quality thinkers. It's no surprise then that some research conducted by Harvard University and reported in the Harvard Business Review found that 61% of executives struggle to think strategically in new roles. And more than 50% of executives fail within the first 18 months of being hired. If their people skills are okay, then there must be something amiss in their thinking skills and execution. The first step in the process of developing cognitive fitness is to develop greater self-awareness and the ways in which you think similarly and differently to others. And we have some great tools to help us in assisting leaders to do that, namely thinking styles and cognitive team roles. 2 psychometrics designed and developed by myself, which have been used by organisations for more than 20 years. I was coaching one senior manager in a London investment bank, and he said that it had taken him 2 years to learn how to think strategically when he had only been used to thinking operationally. He estimated that had he have had access to thinking styles and cognitive team roles, he could have cut 18 months off of his learning curve and become strategically effective in 6 months rather than the 2 years it took him. That Harvard research is onto something. And I didn't realise when I developed thinking styles and cognitive team roles all those years ago that I was actually creating a psychometric tool that could be used to diagnose, understand and support neurodiversity in the workplace, as well as diversity and inclusion. And so the third and final embedded theme is that of culture. Again, at the risk of stating the obvious, managers and leaders create culture. So the importance of leaders being self-aware enough to understand the influence and impact they have in terms of the culture they create really cannot be overstated. And yet, how many organisations actively support their leaders to learn what this means and learn how to create the right culture to engage and support people? Sadly, very few. So here's some research. Almost 50% of us have left a job we loved because of a boss we didn't. 1 out of 2 of us. That's a phenomenal statistic. In terms of the culture we create, it's a real bugbear of mine that speakers on webinars make a statement and don't provide the reference to the research that backs it up, which enables you as the listener to find out more if you want to. So I've deliberately given you The first Management Today reference showing the relevance and importance of the statement. And secondly, and importantly, I've also given you the reference to the original research so that you can read around the topic more if you choose to, and without having to spend time researching to find the original research reference like I had to do. So I've done that bit for you. So this is one of the things we do that makes NextGen coaching different to other coaching programs. We give you some input for you to read around and think about with links and references, so it's easy for you. Then you have a few questions to think about and answer around the topic, leading team productivity and performance, for example. And then we make sure that we embed authentic leadership, increasing cognitive fitness and understanding and creating culture into the module topic, so that when the coaching sessions happen, all of the relevant strands can be woven together. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about authentic leadership. This is the model that emerged from my PhD research when I was working with senior serving RAF officers and UK business leaders. My suggestion is that authentic leadership sits under a roof of relationships and on a bedrock of trust. The Greek temple is a visual reference to Aristotelian virtue ethics, where the examples that are shown within the 3 pillars, such as honesty, fairness, and courage, are consistent with what Aristotle called living a good life, where a good life is a virtuous one. There are, of course, many more characteristics that sit within each of the 3 pillars. And in a moment, I'm going to explore each pillar with you in a little more depth, as well as talking about leadership derailers. So the definition that I like to use of authentic leadership, and it is my definition in case you'd like to use it and quote it, is driven by passion and purpose, authentic leaders combine personal courage with ethical decision-making to deliver successful, sustainable, and meaningful results. The first pillar of authentic leadership is self-awareness. It's a bit more complicated than you might think. Self-awareness is a lifelong journey. It's not a one-off. We can't, unfortunately, simply go on a 2-day course about it and think that we're done. So whilst the 3 pillars are statistically independent, self-awareness is the strongest of them, which is why I've described it as the pivotal pillar. All of the characteristics of authentic leadership correlate with self-awareness in some way. So it really is the key to leadership success. As I mentioned before, self-awareness is the first step on the journey towards cognitive fitness, and it's also a cornerstone of emotional intelligence. In fact, emotional intelligence is predicated on it. The self-awareness comes first. It's also, as you will see, implicated in terms of creating culture. If you want to learn more about self-awareness, there are some good TED Talks on it, and I can recommend Dr. Tasha Eurich. That's E-U-R-I-C-H. She's a full-time self-awareness researcher who has written a New York Times bestseller called Insight. What Tasha doesn't do, however, and we do, is differentiate between self-awareness and self-understanding. This is a critical point, and leaders really do need to develop both. For example, we might be aware that we can sometimes be a bit moody, but we may lack the understanding of why that is. And worse, we can completely fail to see or understand the impact that that has on our colleagues or direct reports. With understanding often comes acceptance, which can facilitate greater choice in terms of what our future leadership behaviours might be. I've mentioned multi-perspectives. Most people simply see the world and others from their own perspective. Rarely do we walk in someone else's shoes and see things from their perspective through their eyes. It's not as easy as it sounds, and it's not always 100% comfortable, particularly if we haven't been our best selves. We can increase our sphere of understanding by asking questions and listening to really learn how things are for other people. Do you know what's important for each of your team or your colleagues? Do you really know what gives their lives meaning and how to motivate or reward them in ways that are meaningful for them, not you? Self-awareness is time-consuming and takes commitment. And finally on this slide, self-awareness is an understanding of where, why, and how we fit into the world. Words such as purpose, meaning, and values all fit in here. The second pillar is self-regulation. It includes things like managing our energy levels, self-discipline, not having emotional, angry outbursts, and patience, resilience, and our openness to showing our vulnerabilities. Do you know the first thing, the number one thing that followers want from their leaders? It's trust. Consistency, emotional self-management, predictability, and honesty all lead to trust. Statistically, being a role model for others maps onto this pillar, as does remaining approachable even when you're under pressure. Do you know what the number one poor leadership characteristics was from the culture slide I showed you earlier? It was unapproachability, followed by poor communication, lousy listening skills, and then aggression. 1 in 3 of us have left a job because of an aggressive leader. The third and final pillar is our ethical orientation. When I originally did the research, I thought that ethical thinking and ethical actions would emerge as 2 factors, but that isn't the case. Our followers predict our ethical behaviours from what we say, and they infer our ethical thinking from our behaviours. So it works both ways. And followers expect these things to be one and the same thing. They expect consistency between what we say and what we do, and they expect them to match. When they don't, followers notice. Not only that, but they find it offensive, and it breaks the psychological contract they have with us. It destroys trust, and like a mistruth, they will never trust us again, even if they forgive us for it. Which leads us nicely onto my last slide, which is about leadership derailers. I'm sure we all know of a leader who's derailed, someone who's behaved so badly that they've had to move on, either voluntarily or otherwise. They might have been being authentic, but as I said before, that on its own is not enough to make them authentic leaders in the way that you now understand it. Remember the Hub research on poor leadership behaviours? I know I've just said it, but I will repeat it again. Not being approachable was the first one. Poor communication skills, number 2. Lousy listening skills. And then number 4, aggression. A combination of traits on the self-awareness and self-regulation pillars, with aggression probably being the most likely to derail a leader these days. So my suggestion to you here is that every example of leadership derailment can be traced back to a deficit on one or more of the 3 pillars. I'll leave you with that thought as we now move into our panel. Over to you, Michael.
Lovely, thank you, Fiona. And indeed, thanks, Lance and Nick, for the content there. So I'm sure you'll all agree, some thought-provoking content. Just before we summarise, just a reminder, you can still submit some questions down in the chat at the bottom. If you direct those to the host, Alex will pick those up. So still time to do that. So just reflecting then on the last 40 minutes or so and the key points that we've heard. First off, we heard from Nick reflect on his own experience of coaching and mentoring and the importance to him of being a good coach and mentee to others. Then Lance outlined the L3E approach to executive coaching and the crucial ways in which it's different from traditional executive coaching and delivering tangible results. And then we've just heard from Fiona and the underpinning philosophies of the programme of authentic leadership, cognitive fitness and culture. So hopefully that's provided plenty of food for thought and raised a few questions. Alex, have we got anything come in? For
I've got one for Fiona. Fiona, how do you measure authentic leadership?
That's a great question. And of course, the interesting thing about measuring authentic leadership when you ask leaders is that they always, well, they always, most people overestimate how authentic they are as leaders, just like the majority of people think that they're better than average drivers. Which statistically can't possibly be true. A lot of leaders do the same. So we use an Authentic Leadership 360, and it came out of the PhD research, and it's designed around the 3 pillars of authentic leadership. And more than that, we also have an open sort of forum within the Authentic Leadership report, so people can give verbatim feedback. They can give examples and give feedback in their own words. So I don't know what people may or may not remember the slide earlier on, but the Authentic Leadership 360 is something that we use at the beginning of the programme, and then we use it at the end as well. To see how people have progressed and how the feedback from their colleagues changes. And unusually for a 360, we also have the facility to include feedback from friends and family. And this is about us being holistic at Libra and wanting to provide leaders with complete support, not just at work, but also, giving them feedback and involving their family and their friends, and as well as their colleagues. And we think that's very important. I've just seen a comment here from Ian saying that you love the holistic angle. Thank you very much, Ian. Yes, we do too.
That's great. Thanks, Fiona. Another one for you, Fiona. Can you please explain a little more about what you mean when you say that leaders can be authentic, but not authentic leaders, capital A, capital L?
Yeah, of course. I think what I would say here, we can, authentic leadership is on a continuum. It's not that people are not authentic leaders and others are. It's that some people are less authentic leaders and other people are more authentic leaders. So if we think about Donald Trump, for example, he was very authentic as a person, as a leader, but he was authentic with a little a. If we think about the 3 pillars of authentic leadership, self-awareness, self-regulation and ethics, arguably, he wasn't particularly great on any one of those 3 pillars. And therefore, in terms of understanding authentic leadership as a construct and being an authentic leader, capital A, capital L, he's less of an authentic leader than perhaps even Boris Johnson or Barack Obama or Jacinta Ardern, who tops the polls in terms of leadership on a global stage, being not just an effective and compassionate leader, but also an authentic leader.
Great. Question for Nick has come in. Starting in 1995 with various coaches along the way, did you ever find yourself in a situation with no available coach or mentor? If yes, what steps did you take to ensure you can continue to learn and develop from others?
Wow, great question. I think it's probably the first couple of years. I mean, I was fortunate enough to do a great graduate scheme. I probably then spent a couple of years not really appreciating the value that having people to bounce ideas off and learn from would really give you. So I think there was probably a maturity thing that I went through of understanding the value, recognizing I learned a huge amount through the graduate training scheme, then had a gap. It was probably somebody I worked for at Arla Foods who really sponsored me and made me realise that there'd been that gap. So I don't think I was probably conscious of it at the time. But looking back now, I can see there was a gap. So if I probably, after 2 or 3 years of experience, I probably had a gap for 2 or 3 years. And yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. But.
Another one for Nick. In your presentation, you mentioned the work that you did on sending signals. Are there resources on this that can be recommended?
I'm sure there are. I don't have a quick answer to that. One thing I would do is say, if you are in meetings or in settings with people where you think someone's done something really well, really try and look at the body language and the way they use things beyond words as to how they control a meeting or how they make a point. I did a personal awareness course at a place called Roffey Park many years ago, and it was through that course that I learned to observe other people and think about which of those tools I could use. I think, again, back to the importance of authenticity. You have to find tools that work for you, not necessarily tools that you can see someone else uses, because it may not work for you, and that authenticity is really important. But there's masses on LinkedIn, actually, all sorts of little things on LinkedIn all the time.
That's great. Michael, that's all the questions we've got for now.
Well, I was just going to jump in, and because we're recording this, and I suspect that quite a lot of people will be listening to it after the event, I was just going to share the Gallup research on what do followers want from their leaders from 2013, and then the top 5 desirable leadership traits from the Hub research that I referenced earlier. So what Gallup did in 2013 is that they actually polled 10,000 followers and said, what do you want from your leaders? And the first thing that leaders wanted was trust. They wanted to be able to trust their leaders. Secondly, they wanted compassion. They wanted to feel that their leaders genuinely cared about them. The third thing they wanted was sustainability. And then the fourth thing they wanted was hope for the future. So that was 2013. And the Hub research, I think, was 2019, might have been 2020. But in terms of their top 5 leadership traits, the first one was honesty, which again relates to trust. The second one was they wanted their leaders to communicate more effectively, to have good communication skills. The third one was remaining approachable under pressure. The fourth desirable leadership trait is effective decision making, which links to cognitive fitness, of course. And then the fifth thing was having a positive attitude, which is about emotional regulation. So I just thought I'd share those with people because I think you might find them useful.
Great, thanks for that, Fiona. So yeah, unless we've got any more questions popped through in that last minute or so, Alex,
No, there are no more.
No, that's cool. We'll wrap things up there then. Yeah, thanks again to Nick, Lance, and Fiona for their input today. Like I say, I'm sure everyone's taken some interesting content from that. Yeah, please reach out to us via email, follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please keep in touch. We'd love to hear from you directly. And if there's any questions that have come up that you haven't had a chance to ask now, or that you think of later down the line, please do get in touch. The recording of this will be available on our website, and we'll drop an email out to everyone that's attended as well. So yeah, all that remains to say is thank you for joining us, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon.